Okay, so now we get to our fabulous guests, and we so appreciate you guys taking the time to be here. We have, I wrote them out of order here, so now I have to sort. Peter McCullough, who has, I've listed all of his little acronyms, is that there? Acronyms on the back of the program, so I won't read them all to you. All of these guys will be speaking tomorrow at the symposium. He's a practicing internist, cardiologist, and professor of medicine at Texas Christian University and the University of North Texas Health Sciences Center of Medicine. He's fabulous. We are so lucky to have him here. Dr. Paul Thomas from Oregon is a pediatrician with 10,000 patients in his practice. He's the author of The Vaccine-Friendly Plan, other books, and multiple peer-reviewed studies, including a vaccinated versus unvaccinated study. For which he lost his medical license. But he has it back. He's just on probation, right? Right?
Forevermore.
Yes. Okay, so Jim Meehan. Jim is a physician, former medical journal editor, award-winning West Point cadet, martial artist, participated in clinical research investigating the associations between military vaccinations, evidence of previous retinal vasculitis, and Gulf War syndrome. Jim is fabulous. If you can come tomorrow, he's speaking first, right after me. So be there bright and early, and you will not be disappointed. Lawrence or Larry?
Either one.
Okay. Larry Palevsky is a medical doctor, pediatrician. He's a New York State licensed holistic and integrative pediatrician. He has a medical degree from the New York School of Medicine. He's a diplomate of the American Board of Integrative Holistic Medicine, past president of the American Holistic Medical Association, and a published author. So thank you. You can give him another round of applause there. So I think I'm going to sit down now. And I have some questions that have been written down for these doctors specifically based on their particular interests. So I hope I got yours right because he was so busy I didn't want to ask him what he wanted to be asked. So I asked you. Did I ask? Oh, and I stole yours from a radio show. Okay. So let's start with Jim Meehan. So you have written a paper and a free ebook on masks. It seems that you have done considerable research on the topic of masks. So 2 questions. Do they work, and can they cause harm?
Yes, to both of those, yeah. I think we've all felt it. You know, the problem that I have with our public health, our captured public health agencies, is they are using low-level trash science to try to convince you that masks are somehow effective. They're not, and we've had 100 years of science that absolutely say they are not effective. And the fact of the matter is nobody has fully investigated them for the harms that they cause. I mean, not in this era. Our CDC did not do a safety study, and that's something that every parent needs to question every level of the school system to ask them and demand that they provide you evidence of the safety study, because I'm telling you that there are about 20 ways. I outlined 17 ways. There's so many ways, but I outlined 17 ways in my paper. You can get it at meehanmd.com. Arm yourself when you go talk to these bureaucrats, these unelected bureaucrats that are intervening in your children's health in a way that is very harmful. It's got to stop, folks.
Okay, Dr. McCullough, can you address natural immunity related to COVID and the COVID vaccine?
That's a favorite topic. How many in the room here have had COVID?
Okay, that's going to be this is going to be pretty germane. There are 15 studies that demonstrate the principles that once you've recovered from COVID-19 with a well-documented case, that you had the characteristic signs and symptoms, a positive test to go along with it, PCR antigen test, that you have robust, complete, and durable immunity. This virus is 90% similar to SARS-CoV-1. That's the original SARS virus. There, the immunity has been 17 years long, and no one's gotten a second case of that. We believe the same thing is true for this virus. I'm still waiting to see a bona fide case of a reinfection. Every time somebody brings something to me, I look at it, and it's always this myth that you can get it over and over again is driven by the fact that the PCR tests give lots of false positives, and there's confusion regarding prior antibodies. What you need to know is that the immunity, the best we understand, is absolute. And while our CDC has got thousands and thousands of well-documented vaccine failures in the hospital or have died on their website, they have 0 cases of failure of natural immunity. 0.
Okay, Dr. Thomas, how do you take care of sick children in a world where everything is COVID until proven otherwise?
So we're getting those calls like crazy already. Normally summer is just sprains and broken bones and cuts and scrapes and things like that. It's as if we're at the middle of winter. Kids are coming in with fevers, coughs, vomiting, and diarrhea, the usual array of symptoms. If you're a parent, you know these things. In today's world, it's COVID until proven otherwise, that's the world we live in. Okay. I wish it didn't need to be that way, because if you understood what Dr. McCullough just said, if you understood that kids do fine with this virus, we would just let them all get it and treat it like any other cold and flu symptom. And as long as they're not so sick that they need to be in the hospital, we would reassure and talk about nutrition and hydration and go home and be fine. And we would develop a very protective society that, what was your term for it? The
Immunologic buffer.
Oh, I love that. Immunologic buffer of these kids who've had COVID, and half this room, you guys are the immunologic buffer. You've already had COVID. That's amazing. But the workup really is no different than it used to be, other than just proving first they don't have COVID. So we keep them in the parking lot till we prove that, then they bring them into the office and treat them like regular. Past winters, the sickest kids who we would hospitalize, we used to do a test where you could test about 30 different pathogens. So all the different influenza A and B and paraflu and RSV and mycoplasma and strep and staph and you name it, right? We would know what they had before they were hospitalized or about to be hospitalized. At the height of the flu season each year, what percentage of those really sick flu-like kids actually had the flu? Any guess?
5.
Yeah, 5. Maybe on a big year 10, but usually around 5%. It's no different right now for COVID. So I'm testing COVID in my office, and it's somewhere between 5 or 10% on the sickest kids. So not everything that might be COVID is COVID, and kids do well with COVID anyway.
Dr. Palevsky, we all know that any doctor that decides to join the medical freedom movement pays a price for it. So I would like to ask you, what brought you to the point you're at? What made you decide to put your career at risk by joining the medical freedom movement?
Okay, thank you. First, I don't believe that my career is at risk because my job as a physician is to practice and uphold the Hippocratic Oath, which is first do no harm. And so when I started medical school in 1983, we were taught the scientific method. The scientific method is such that when you see an observation of findings and you either don't understand it or it seems curious to you, you ask a question. What could be bringing on this series of findings? And then once you ask the question, you go through the method of evaluating whether a hypothesis of what could be causing those findings can be studied, evaluated, and whether you can draw any conclusions from it. And so when people hear me speak, one of the first things I say is, if you want to accuse me of anything, blame my medical school for teaching me to do critical thinking and use the scientific method. So, throughout my career, having worked in pediatric emergency rooms in New York, running a pediatric ICU, working in a neonatal intensive care unit, working in inpatient pediatrics, teaching residents and medical students, having a clinic, and then practicing for over 20 years doing holistic integrative pediatrics, my curiosity got the best of me, and if I saw something that didn't make sense, I was going to ask the question. And over the years, I found that the more questions I asked, the more I was being told not to ask them. And so in today's world, where people are saying COVID-19 is caused by a virus, I think that there's a conversation to have about whether or not we have proven that the symptoms of COVID-19 are actually caused by a virus. And so where's the healthy discussion where we can have a debate in public and let people hear the doctors and the scientists go at it? And so when you hear people say COVID-19 is a vaccine, and then you hear some of us say, no, it's not, why not have a scientific discussion so that the public can hear what we're going through in trying to understand what's going on? When you hear people say that the PCR test is positive and giving you an understanding that you have COVID-19, well, why aren't we talking about all the people and scientists and doctors who are saying, no, the PCR test can't even diagnose any viral infection or any infection at all? And so we're seeing lots of opposing views, but yet over the years I've watched only one narrative be allowed to be offered into the public domain. And so now when we're seeing children and adults suffering at the hands of this injection, we are at the pinnacle of the mantra that I have known about for over 25 years, which is vaccines are safe and vaccine injury is rare. And yet, when I was in medical school, what we were taught, always listen to the mother. She knows her child better than anybody else. And I went through periods in my career where I ignored it and forgot it and got kicked in the butt and kicked in the knees because I ignored it and forgot it. But over the years, my understanding of always listen to the mother got stronger and stronger. And so what we're seeing over the last 25, 30 years, and especially now, is when the mother says, my kid got the shot and no longer spoke, we were ignoring her experience. And then when it happened 100 times, 500 times, 1,000 times, 5,000 times, hundreds of thousands of times, we still ignored it. And so what would the scientific method say? Wow, look at how many parents are saying their children were damaged after they got the shot. Shouldn't we ask a question, is there anything in the shot that would lead to the kids getting neurologically damaged? And we've never done the study. And so the scientific method says we need to do the study, but the agenda says don't ask the question.
Hey, Dr. McCullough, you have used a variety of early interventions. Can you talk about which treatments have been most successful and what is your personal success rate with those treatments?
Yep, I think probably the biggest message, about half the group has had COVID-19. How many of you had some form of treatment for COVID-19? Look at that, so that's a much smaller percentage. What we know is that of adults, probably about 25% of adults really need treatment for COVID-19 to reduce the risks of hospitalization and death. For the other 75% of adults, the risk of hospitalization and death are so sufficiently low, it's not worth treating. And this has been true in American society. The Iranians have done a wonderful study. They look at, like in Iran, who gets treated. They treat 25% of adults that have high-risk features. So age over 50, and we start adding medical problems, obesity, diabetes, heart and lung disease, kidney disease, prior cancer, we can identify somebody who's at risk. And most of the people you can think of in your circles who are already struggling a little bit with their health, you can just imagine them getting a rough case of COVID-19 and seeing them wind up in the hospital. It's actually not too hard to figure this out. Almost everybody in the nursing home is at risk to be hospitalized. And what we've learned is that we can use drugs in combination to reduce the rate that the virus replicates early, then attenuate the amount of inflammation, what's called cytokine storm, that the virus stirs up, and then lastly, prevent blood clotting, because blood clotting in the end is what causes the problem in the lungs and the low oxygen saturation, and then ultimately death. It's a blood clotting death, and it's unique to this virus that we don't see in other viruses. So the innovation was the idea that wasn't going to be a single drug, no miracle cure. We're going to use drugs in combination. It's called sequence multi-drug therapy for COVID-19. I published a seminal paper in August of 2020 and a follow-up in December 2020. It became the basis for the home treatment guide. So if you go to truthforhealth.org, the home treatment guide is there, and it lays out the array of treatments that can be done in sequence combination that doctors can prescribe. And it leads off with the monoclonal antibodies, which are a wonderful treatment for high-risk patients. I just had 2 of my patients get that today. When we use all these drugs in combination, we have demonstrated to the best we can, without having funded large-scale multi-drug randomized trials, which are still not even planned, but the best we can from compared to expected rates, that we can reduce the risks of hospitalization and death by 85%. And that's the reason why we had 2 historic U.S. Senate hearings on this. That's the reason why we've organized telemedicine services, and we've pushed so hard on early treatment. If we do nothing before the hospital, we can't prevent a hospitalization. I think everybody would agree with that.
Dr. Meehan, what kind of exemption would you recommend people get if they are getting pushed into the vaccine? Would you suggest a medical exemption or a religious exemption?
You really should ask Larry this question, because he had the better answer this afternoon. And so I'm going to...
Should we let him answer it?
I really think...
No, you answer it, and then I'll say something.
No, I'd be wrong.
You won't be wrong.
Let Larry answer this afterwards. You know, my answer has been to many of my patients is, file a religious exemption and understand why you should file that religious exemption. Number one, it's a constitutional protection. You can really fight legally on that basis. Number 2, understand why you should have that legal exemption. Our vaccines, many of our vaccines are heavily contaminated with the cellular remnants of aborted fetal cells. If you're, a person of faith, as I am, when I learned that, because they don't teach you that in medical school. When I learned that after, vaccinating most of my 5 children, I was appalled, because that was never told to me. I was never given, my wife and I, my beautiful wife Kathy right here, we were never given fully informed consent. We were never told that these vaccines are loaded with neurotoxic levels of aluminum, polysorbate 80 that will open up the blood-brain barrier and allow everything else that we pump into their arms and legs and multiple limbs at the same time could enter the brain and cause problems. But for me, as a follower of Christ, to learn that we were defiling the bodies of our children with multiple childhood vaccines that are contaminated, they're grown on a cell line that was harvested from a child that at the moment of its birth was captured in a saline bag, taken by the vaccinologist to the vivisection table, torn apart without anesthesia, so that its tissues could become the substrate for endless replication and production of vaccines, like the rubella portion of the MMR vaccine, the chickenpox vaccine, hepatitis A, and the Johnson & Johnson COVID-19 vaccine. Many of the vaccines use aborted fetal cells, as the mRNA vaccines do, during the development and quality control procedures. You would be surprised how much, human tissue is being used in the development of foods and taste testing. But our vaccines injected into our children, that is horrific to me. I've debated many pediatricians, none of them as bright, brilliant, and aware as these gentlemen up here, but most pediatricians, when I tell them, hey, did you know you know, the varicella vaccine has twice as much human antigen as it has varicella antigen. No, Dr. Meehan, you're crazy, you're a quack, you don't know what you're talking about. And then I pull out the package insert for the varicella vaccine, and right there it is, and for everyone to see. And it's, you know, it's embarrassing to them, but it's frustrating to me because they profit from that. They do it every single day. It is the basis of their practice, and they don't know, and people don't know that you should object. I think it's abominable. I think it's horrific. If I had known, we never would have allowed those vaccines to my children. So that's my answer. File the religious exemption and fight for it. Because what they're doing is they're coercing you to submit when they know they don't have a legal ground to stand upon. But having said that, Larry's answer is better.
But wait, before... So before Larry answers the question, I just want everybody to know, since I'm sure that most of us in here belong to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, your religious exemption is not connected to your organized religion. Especially in the state of Utah, we have separated the kids' exemptions from the organized religion. So don't think you can't get it because your church is in favor of vaccines. Okay, I mean this vaccine.
I got to follow this now, right? So, number one, we have absolutely no understanding of what the ingredients are in these injections. The package insert is completely blank. Number two, it takes 7 to 10, maybe 15 years for an injection to be proven to be a vaccine and to work. And this was fast-tracked very, very quickly. Number three, at least for messenger RNA, there is no history, there's no precedence, there's no evidence that this technology can, has been, or will reduce or eliminate any infectious disease. So we don't know if this is actually a vaccine that would do what we need a vaccine to do when we think we have an infectious illness. The mantra of vaccines are safe and effective and vaccine injury is rare is being pushed very, very strongly and has been for many decades, especially after 1986, when the vaccine manufacturers had almost complete removal of any liability, and then when it was completely removed in 2011. The thing is that what is happening right now is that we have promoted an idea that if you're unvaccinated, you are a disease, and that you are capable of spreading something to others that no one else who's vaccinated could possibly have or spread. And that's the third mantra, that unvaccinated children are the disease carriers and therefore the ones who start illness. There is no evidence anywhere in history that shows that unvaccinated children are the ones who spread disease, or that the vaccines will stop the people who are vaccinated from carrying the germ or transmitting the germ. And yet, that becomes the third mantra as to why we all need to get this shot, even though there is no evidence anywhere that this shot will stop you from carrying the virus or stop you from transmitting the virus to others. The problem is that if you're looking for a religious or medical exemption, you have made the choice that you will not participate in this medical system and what they're pushing. And so that means, and for many people, and I sat next to Allison the whole night and didn't know, because we were talking about so many other things, that you were so big on the homeschooling, which is a very passionate issue for me as well. Because many parents not only don't choose the medical system, they're choosing not to use the educational system. And what we're finding is not only a willingness to avoid the medical system, but also to avoid the educational system, the banking system, the finance system, and many of the other systems that are here. And so if you're looking for a religious or a medical exemption, you're actually saying, I don't want your system, but I do need your system. And I'm a purist at heart. And so I'm hoping that people won't use exemptions, that they won't try to get through the system just to buy their time, but they'll actually do the real civil disobedience, which is I'm not gonna quit, and I'm not gonna get the shot, and I'm gonna resist, I'm gonna say no, I'm gonna file a formal complaint, I'm gonna wait until you fire me. Now I understand, and I said this afternoon, I understand that some people can't afford to do that. Financially, they can't afford to just miss their job, or they can't afford to take their kids out of school. But for the civil disobedience, what's really needed in this country, we need people to not acquiesce and not try to skirt the system. We need people. We need people to take their kids out of school, because the business of America is business. And if you don't send your kids to school, the schools lose money. And if you don't go to the work and they get rid of you, the businesses will fail. Now that might be an end-around game that they're trying to play, but we need that kind of civil disobedience. So I'm hoping that we don't use exemptions. And I don't write mask exemptions, and I don't write medical exemptions for the kids or the parents in my practice, because I'm hoping that they don't ask mommy and daddy to take care of them while they know mommy and daddy want to kill them at the same time. Mommy and daddy being the authority. Yeah, thanks for clarifying. Mommy and daddy being
Dr.
the authority.
Thomas.
Yeah.
We're just going to do two more questions. I'm going to ask you a question, then I'm going to ask you a question, the medical exemption question, and then we're out of time. So, Dr. Thomas, how much COVID are you seeing in your pediatric practice of 10,000 patients?
We've had 152 tests done in the last 11 months, and 12 positives. So not that much. You're seeing a lot more here, right here.
Any with symptoms? Any with symptoms of classic COVID?
So I've heard of a couple teenagers have loss of sense of smell and taste, some mild respiratory stuff, but nobody's seriously ill. Nobody's been to the ER. Nobody's obviously died. Nobody's been hospitalized. This is a minor thing for children.
Okay, so final question. I want to know from Dr. McCullough, what are your thoughts on medical exemptions?
Yeah, I'll just give you this is the reason why we get into a panel, right? No two doctors agree on everything. And, I've been on national TV saying, what we haven't seen on national TV is a panel of doctors, going through a discussion. That's what we should be doing. We've been seeing one or two faces and a very monolithic approach without any debate, without any interchange. What we're doing tonight is a right, and we are participating in a topic of public interest. I'm actually being sued by my health system. I've been stripped of all my professorships, by the way, but I'm being sued by my health system in a sense because I can go on Fox News, or I can go talk to Tucker Carlson, or I can do this and discuss a topic of public interest. And what they've applied against me is called a strategic lawsuit against public participation, of which I am fighting. This is important for you to understand, because if this censorship goes on and it's successful, we will not do this anymore. We are going to be hunted, our medical licenses, our board certifications, and this is just a healthy thing. You all hear this is a healthy interchange. So I'm going to give you another point on religious and medical exemptions. I say religious exemptions from a very broad perspective. It's more probable than not that these vaccines can damage or injure the human body. It's against most religions that to forbid injection of any substance in the human body when you expect harm. I mean, it's just that simple. It cuts across everything. When it comes to medical exemptions, I look at it this way. A medical exemption really is a doctor's decision based on risks and benefits. And when these vaccines came out of the clinical trials, they had recruited largely people with no medical problems. I mean, about 60% of people in the J&J trial, Pfizer, they had no medical problems. None. Zero. They were perfectly healthy people who signed up for these trials. And when we got through the registrational trials, there were side effects. There were mainly local side effects, but we didn't see horrific cases of blood clots in the clinical trials. We didn't see horrific cases of paralysis and on and on and on. Now we get in the public program. Our agencies have given us no report card on safety, zero. No press conference. I mean, we should have had these weekly press conferences. How are we doing on safety? How are we doing on efficacy? We've been stonewalled on the vaccine program from our federal officials from the very beginning. And yet, at the same time, our vaccine adverse event reporting system has racked up 545,000 vaccine injury reports. 13,000 dead Americans. Over 200,000 people wound up in the hospital, sick, with problems or ER visits, etc. This is catastrophic. This is catastrophic. And when I presented for the Heritage Foundation in Washington about a couple months ago, which had a lot of prominent people there, they give a lot of advice to both sides, the House and the Senate, and others, you could hear a pin drop. And finally, somebody who's a former AMA president said, Dr. McCullough, we have the biggest biological catastrophe in human history on our hands right now. We've had two administrations completely buy into it, the media, the House, and the Senate, and it is a freight train we can't stop. Right. Okay, and this was a broadly attended meeting. Believe me, people know something is very bad going on. I think the role of the medical exemption is for a doctor to evaluate what's going on and try to get an understanding if we have a hazard here. So, for example, there are 24,000 severe allergic reactions. One of the questions on these forms says, have you ever had a fatal reaction to the COVID-19 vaccine? I mean, what a dumb question. You haven't had it yet, right? I mean, how can you know? But could you have one? Could you have one? You better believe it. And we know from shot 1 to shot 2, there's an 80-fold increased risk in adverse effects. I mean, the data are very clear. So someone who is polyallergic, someone who's had other allergies to problems, on a more likely than not basis, they're going to fall into that category. Patients with prior heart disease, as an example, are a setup to have the myocarditis injury. People with blood clotting disorders, we've already seen this. There are publications of people with hypertension where the blood pressure shoots up and there's aortic dissection, horrific strokes. All these things have happened. These can be partially anticipated. So I am in favor of a risk-benefit type of analysis, and I'm pretty broad on medical exemptions. I really am, and I think it's appropriate to do that. So my view, full medical and full religious exemptions, that's my personal view. And then what the idea is, you run out the clock and you take it all the way to the very end. And if your medical and religious exemptions are denied, which is amazing, someone can deny your religious rights, right? They're denied. That you go ahead and run out the clock and then file a dispute or file a letter of intent to sue. I'm going to finish with one quick. I know you probably disagree, but it's not right. But just one quick anecdote. There was a pharmacist, young Asian guy. He's out in Kaiser, California. He's texting me, Dr. McCullough. He goes, they're going to make us get the vaccine. I'm afraid of it. You know, I said, well, file the medical and religious exemptions. And so he tries to fill out everything. He files it. And I said, keep me updated. So he files it. He clicks send, and he sends to Kaiser. And within like 10 minutes, it comes back, and it says, your exemptions have been rejected. And then he texts me back. He goes, they rejected it. He said, I'm doomed. And I said, email him back and ask him, where's the office to file your letter of intent to file suit? And so he emailed him back. He goes, is this the office where my attorney calls to file a letter of intent to sue? And then the next email back, we're happy to accept your exemption. It's a giant game of chicken.
So, Dr.
Palevsky has a follow-up.
Yeah, Dr. McCullough, I actually agree with what you just said. The perspective where I was coming from is that at least in the pediatric world, there are doctors who have been threatened and taken to court and taken to cleaners for writing medical exemptions that state boards believed were inappropriate, even if they were appropriate. I have a 22-year-old boy in my practice who I've known for 16 and a half years, who had probably the beginnings of leukemia at 8 months after a hepatitis B vaccine that he resolved on his own. And then at 15 developed AML, acute myelocytic leukemia. And I did not write his medical exemption because I won't put my name on it because I'm a target. And a doctor wrote a medical exemption and it was denied. And the parents appealed and the doctor appealed and it was denied. And then it was found out that the university where he was attending, 500 students had written medical exemptions and they were all denied. And then it was found out that Pfizer is a big donator of that university. And the dean of the health system told the parents, just have him write a religious exemption, we'll accept it. And so the medical exemption has been an issue gone after, at least in the pediatric world, very, very violently for a number of years. And there have been attempts throughout the country to limit medical exemptions, to limit the criteria by which medical exemptions could be accepted. And doctors have been threatened. And so that's one of the reasons that I said what I said, because I'm hoping that by my not writing them and other doctors not writing them, it'll move people into action rather than into passivity to just get by in the system. There is no doubt that there is no healthy person that should get this shot, that there is no unhealthy person that should get this shot. There is no person who should get this shot.
Okay, so Larry got an extra.
I did, sorry.
An
Do I
extra
get a
turn.
lash?
Does everyone else want an extra turn?
Do I get a...
Anyone? Any parting words? Okay, could we have a round of applause for these amazing doctors? Thank you.